Thank you for being here with us tonight for yet another adventure in Italian opera with Fred Plotkin, the most beloved and long-lasting series here at the Casa, where Fred Plotkin meets the protagonists of today's opera on our small stage, normally coming from the big stage of the Metropolitan, as it is the case tonight. I will leave to Fred the pleasure to introduce his own guest, and my job in this occasion is to tell you something new about Fred, is possible, because I believe I told you a lot about him, but there is a very good piece of good news, that is his first book, The Authentic Pasta Book, is going to be re-released in a virtual format. Is that correct, Fred? CKBK Cookbook, The Authentic Pasta Book. So if you're interested, check it out. You can give it. It's a great Christmas present. If you don't want to eat some lousy pasta, make sure people get The Authentic Pasta Book before Christmas or before Thanksgiving. If you're an Italian household, you probably have the double Thanksgiving, right? With the American food and the Italian food. Just make sure people that cook receive it before the big day, okay? And we'll try to do something also to present it here, of course. But tonight it's opera. And we are delighted to have Patrick Carfizzi here with us, and we cannot wait to listen to the conversation between Fred and Patrick Carfizzi. Please welcome them very warmly.
Thank you. Merci. Thank you. Have a seat. So we're all old friends here. I can tell you I left my house without my belt tonight. So, welcome. If you know, who here does not know the opera Tosca? One person. Okay, so you'll love it. Pardon me? There's a line in Tosca, which I'm going to use about our guest tonight, though the circumstances, the dramatic circumstances are very different, as I want to reassure you. Ecco l'artista. Here's the artist. But what that means is not simply here's the artist, the painter, the singer, whatever, but here's the person who is endowed with artistic gifts and uses them to his fullest. And that's how I've always thought of Patrick Carfizzi. We've never met until tonight. And therefore, it's going to be my pleasure, as well as yours, to get to know him and his remarkable career, not only at the Met, but especially at the Met. I would say you appear courtesy of the Metropolitan Opera tonight. So please welcome Patrick Carfizzi.
Thanks so much.
So, you have sung nearly 500 performances at the Metropolitan Opera. In how many different roles? I don't know if you're keeping track.
I don't keep track. As a rule,
Yeah.
I am very happy for the archivists to keep track and keep count. I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 roles at this point. But yeah, it's easier not to count. Sometimes it's better just to continue to enjoy the ride.
Let's put it this way, that for many of my guests, I have 1 or 2 or maybe 3 pages of the list of their roles, 7 pages. So, and I didn't reprint some of them. For example, your debut role was the Count Ceprano in Verdi's Rigoletto. And one of the many things I find very interesting about you is that in addition to adding to your repertory, doing bigger roles, you return occasionally to the smaller roles. Mm-hmm. So even relatively recently, you've done the Count Ceprano, mm-hmm. who is here and then he's not here. He's in the first act of Rigoletto. The Duke likes his wife. The wife gets pulled this way. Ceprano gets pulled that way. That's mostly it.
Yes.
For that character. But you are a great Ceprano.
Thanks.
And I note your reaction when the Duke has taken your wife to have her, and there's nothing you can do, because that's the politics of court. And it's a notable moment. And you are the term that sometimes uses comprimario. I don't usually stick to that term. I've had other guests on this stage, Stephen Cole and Anthony Lectura, or tenors, and they're also comprimario. But I had Ryan Speedo Green here recently, and he's done small roles and large roles at the Met. And he was told when he started at the Met there are no small roles, and that you could be doing the small role, but you have to make the most of it, and you will. And what I would say about the work of Patrick Carfizzi is that the role may be brief. You're not a ham at all. You're an actor who also happens to have a wonderful voice. That's a gift. You didn't do that, but you're very well trained. And there's something about you that I can point to certain other singers. I always like to point to Nadine Sierra, the soprano, when I say this. You're very musical.
Thank you.
And not every singer can have a great voice, be trained as a musician, but not be musical. And I'm always aware when you're singing, whether it's a role that's 3 minutes long or 2 hours long, that you are alert to the music or alive to the music. Am I on the right track?
As best I can be. That's part of the job, right? Is to be engaged with the music, to be fully invested in the moment, and to let the storytelling through music really take over and guide us through the performance, so that it's not so much a matter of trying to impress upon the music our ideas and our choices that perhaps we made in advance, but more to trust the study, to trust the work, to trust the process that led to the performance, and then let that flow in community with our fellow colleagues, with the audience, with everyone who's come into the theater for that experience that night. That organic nature, to me, is the work that is part of the work that never ends. As a singer, as a performer, as an actor, and so yeah, hopefully that's the work we do.
I said to you upstairs, because as I said, we just met tonight, and that his first 2 roles, I was aware that he was in the cast as Soprano and as the porter in Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk. But frankly, when you have Catherine Malfitano doing a magnificent job in the middle of the production with Valery Gergiev conducting, I didn't notice the porter.
That's fair. Vote Kluch, and we're done.
But the next opera, which is a favorite of mine, Handel's Giulio Cesare, conducted by John Nelson. Everyone has to be a great singer when you're doing Handel, because there's no place to hide. There's no orchestra to cover. I mean, there's an orchestra, but nothing that will cover you. You have to really sing well, and I want you to talk about this rather than me. The markings on the score of a Handel opera are very different, say, from a Richard Strauss opera.
For sure.
In that Strauss tells you exactly what he wants. Puccini kind of sort of tells you exactly what he wants. That's an early 20th century thing. But the 18th century with Handel, when you look at a Handel score, the role you played was Curio. How did you develop your performance? Because you were a new artist then.
It was my second season at the Met.
You were about 26.
My first season at the Met, actually, 2000. I was about 26, and I learned early on, actually, that Handel, in particular, much like Mozart, always benefited by not adding layers, not trying to add any more than was necessary. So letting the idea, the text, and the music just simply speak. Because we don't have the level of detail from the composer that we do, say, in Strauss or in Verdi, it's necessary, I think, even more to trust the music. The transparency of Handel and Mozart also is a big clue for what we need to do as performers. We don't need to do a lot. And dramatically, we also don't need to add any unnecessary flourish that hasn't been really well thought through. We can talk about ornamentation as well, of course. These choices, again, have to be very much thought through, planned out. If there's an inspiration that strikes a singer in the evening, that's great. But more likely than not, what we're dealing with is really taking a look at a beautiful, transparent idea of storytelling through music when we look at Mozart and Handel. And so, yeah, it's a very different thing from preparing a Rossini opera.
Yeah.
It's very, or Donizetti, where you know you have to make it feel like it's a little more at home. With Mozart and Handel, you get to live within the page, directly in the center of the page and nowhere else.
So I don't get to talk about Handel as much as I'd love to, so we're going to stick with him for a
Yeah,
minute.
that's great.
He was born in Germany in 1685, but at that time, the opera capital of the world was Venice. And anybody who wanted to make his name or her name as a singer or his name as a composer in opera eventually got to Venice. And Handel got there as a very young man and learned the Venetian opera style, the music, the sense of costumes, the sense of drama, the beauty of Venice, the sensuality of Venice, all of that informed his music, plus he was a musical genius. But he did not necessarily, early on, come from the religious tradition of German music, although he got to that later with oratorios. But he went right into opera and he loved it. And by 1709, he was learning his craft in Venice and was turning out big hits. And he did it in Italian. And then he later moved to London and brought Italian opera composed by a German to London, but in Italian. And he ran an opera company in London for many, many years. He lived on Brook Street, 34 Brook Street. Those of you who love classic rock and roll, Jimi Hendrix lived in the same building, not at the same time. And now, it used to be the Georg Friedrich Handel Museum. Now it's the Handel Hendrix Museum. I'm not kidding, on 34 Brook Street. And so Handel's presence is really in London, and the Messiah, his most famous work, he wrote in Dublin. But most of what he did in terms of opera, all of it really, was in Italian, and oratorio was mostly in English. So he separated them that way. And with Handel, it was about the great singers. So when you look at a Handel score, there's relatively little in terms of the orchestra and the vocal line, and there are not that many words. It's not like singing the Marshall into Rosenkavalier, which can give you a headache learning all those words. But with Handel, it's really, 4 lines that you repeat in different ways. What I want to ask you is, one of the characteristics of a great Handel singer is that he or she often has to stand on the stage with lots of music coming out of the orchestra without singing. And then they'll sing, and then they'll not sing. And I can always tell the good singers because they're still in character and they're still hearing the music, and we're hearing the music and whatever it is that we read on their faces as they're often standing still is fabulous. So how do you fill in those gaps, let's call them, when you're not singing but you're standing on stage with music playing from the orchestra?
The story that we tell in the silence, both physically and in the silence vocally, is really remarkable and takes a ton of work, a ton of discipline, and most importantly, a really wonderful amount of creativity. Again, trust in the music. You'll hear me say this a lot. I really believe that the trust in the piece, the trust in the pieces, the trust in the work and the process are really key to what we do. And in these moments in opera, when you simply inhabit the character, you allow the character time to breathe and to think, and you're not simply repeating what you've learned. You're not just regurgitating. You're actually listening to it again, as we would listen to any great poem read time and time and time and time and time again, and each time hear it in a new way, hear it in a new light. This is the same goal as a performer, especially in these moments where we're not singing and where we're taking the idea and energy from the shape in the orchestra, perhaps, or maybe from the shape that the stage director has encouraged us to embrace. So these moments they're wonderful. They're a wonderful moment to settle and to let the story congeal more. Let the story have more gravitas in the silence and in the careful approach to the music, as opposed to trying to fill it with all kinds of choice, most of which will dissipate and won't make any sense to an audience and won't communicate to an audience. I learned very early on from a teacher of mine that even on a stage as big as the Met, 4,000 at capacity, the whites of your eyes can be seen from any seat, and from any, and even just that slight subtle movement is enough to bring the audience with you in the journey. If we're in a moment like this in a Handel aria in particular, we must allow that quiet in the body to let the music take precedence.
In addition to what you're saying about the whites of the eyes, the acoustics at the Met are so good. 2 nights ago, I went to Tosca for maybe the 150th time, and it was a wonderful night, and the Met is doing it in this run through the 23rd of November, which will be an international HD broadcast. I encourage people always to see it in the house more than on HD, but also in HD. You will be part of the HD, along with Lisa Davidson, Freddie Di Tommaso, and Quinn Kelsey, among others. And I sat in the balcony because sometimes I go and I don't need to watch the drama. And I wanted this time, because I'm going again. So next time I'll look at the acting. But this time I want to just listen to Lisa Davidson, who I'd never heard as Tosca. I'd never heard Freddie Di Tommaso. Quinn Kelsey doing his first Met Scarpia. He's a good friend of mine. Patrick's, whose performance I know very well as the Sacristan, which we're going to talk about in a bit. But at a certain point, Quinn Kelsey put down a spoon, not the knife, but a spoon, and it hit a teacup. In the balcony, I could hear the spoon hit the cup. That is how good the acoustics are at the Met.
Yes.
So more about Handel because I happen to love Handel. That's not
As
a
do
pun,
I.
by the way. Love Handels. I didn't think of that. It's just- if you got it, flaunt it. But I do love Georg Friedrich Handel. He was what the Italians call a buona forchetta. He loved to eat. And he was a loner. We know very little about his private life. We know he had a manservant. When you go to the house at Brook Street, you could see how he lived, where his clothing was kept, where he gave his musicals and so on. And there was a restaurant nearby where he would go to eat near Brook Street. And he apparently retained a slight German accent despite the Italian and living in London. And he would sit down, order a table for 3, order food for 3, and they would say, "Maestro, don't you want to wait till your guest arrives?" He said, "No one is coming." And he would eat all 3 meals. So he ate a lot of food. He lived a long enough life for that time. But he really did know his food, and maybe that started in Germany. Certainly it continued in Venice. And he really was an important figure, a cultural figure in London. I can't think in our time right now of a figure in New York who, not because of his size, casts that kind of shadow, but culturally casts a shadow. Yannick Nézet-Séguin at the Met is a very hardworking maestro, and he does that, but he's not. Maybe Leonard Bernstein in his time was more that he was a figure known to everyone in the city. But Handel's music, as Marilyn Horne once said to me, has schwung, it swings. And what she meant is that within that music that's on the notes on the page, she could find jazz cadences and things to work in, not where she was, quote, improving on what Handel did, but finding things in the music that she could make the music more exciting, not just because she was Marilyn Horne, because in your cast that night you had Jennifer Larmore, Hae Kyung Hong, Stephanie Blythe, David Daniels, Brian Ozawa, Michael Forrest, and you. All of you did that in Giulio Cesare that night. So did the conductor, John Nelson, inspire that, or how did that happen, that this was just, it was a ripping musical performance? It was just, we were agog in the audience to listen.
I mean, it was a combination of John Nelson and John Copley,
Yeah.
because
the
that's Copley.
director.
That was Copley's,
Yeah.
the director of the production, and both of them gave the room for that to happen. Both of them
Okay.
made it possible that we did not have to do extra. Copley, in particular, was always very good at helping you find definition in a character, and yeah, he was quite good at that.
And I would add characters who, not in Giulio Cesare, but in other operas, who could seem preposterous.
Yes.
For example, he directed the Met production of Rossini's Semiramide, where the characters can seem very preposterous, but sometimes, I'm always asked, what's your favorite opera? Occasionally, my favorite opera is Rossini's Semiramide, because musically it is just so spectacular. And when John Copley directed it, I put aside the implausibility of the dramatic situations just because, okay, if she's upset and she sings this way for 20 minutes, that way, I don't care if what she's upset about is stupid. Like, that's not your son, that is your son. Whatever, it doesn't matter, because it's a sheer musical spectacular. And so now your next opera after that, we're not going to do every opera, but I remember early on, by the third one, I thought, who is this Patrick Carfizzi? So the next opera is one of my favorite operas, Beethoven's Fidelio. A few months later, it stars one of my favorite artists of all, Carita Mattila. It starred Renee Papa, who will be in this chair on March 5th. It starred Ben Heppner, Sergei Liferkus, a young singer in a smaller role named Matthew Polenzani, who was here, James Morris, and the second prisoner of two prisoners. The first one was Charles Castronovo, who recently sang at the Met in Ballo and Maschera. And the second prisoner was that guy, Patrick Carfizzi, who I noticed in Giulio Cesare. And this was December of 2000. Talk about that experience as a still very young artist in your first season.
It was a very formative moment for me. I was not scheduled to do the entire run. I was sharing the run with Alfred Walker, and there was a snowstorm. And so I ended up going into the run a little sooner. Alfred was fine, dear friend, wonderful singer. He was... there was a big snowstorm on December 30th, and his car got stuck in Nyack. And so I got a call from the Met, and they said, we were going to do Second Prisoner tonight. I said, great. They said, but Maestro Levine wants to meet with you beforehand and just, talk through things. And to have that kind of individual attention, that kind of guidance for just 2 lines, was remarkable. And it shows you how, as Ryan said, and as all of us say, there really are no small parts. And it really is a matter of what you do with it. Being in that cast also was spectacular. It's interesting because the following year came the 9/11 opening night, which was Mirella Freni, Placido Domingo. And so it was... not long after this would come also Pelléas and Mélisande, which ends up being one of my favorite operas of all time, but also with a stellar cast, José Van Damme, Robert Lloyd. So being able to listen to these incredible artists, Ben Heppner in particular, and Carita, and listen to how they craft their singing and watching how they craft their dramatic performance. It's a source of endless inspiration.
Yeah.
Because you want nothing more than to find out, how does it work? How did they think about this? What's their process? What is it that they bring every night? When you're 26, 27 years old and working at the Met, you just... And I have to say, this hunger has never left me, thankfully. This hunger is still with me today. I still love the learning And this Fidelio in particular was yet another great launch into that pool of learning, if you will, with Maestro Levine and all of these other great artists. So it was very special.
Do you recall, do you want to share what the words he said to you were about the two lines?
Yes. We met in List Hall, and I sang it for him once.
List Hall being where the chorus rehearses.
Exactly, and also where you audition from time to time. And I sang it for him one time through, and he said, "That's good, kid. That's good. Yeah, that's good." He's like, "Now, do it again, and this time, allow your breath to come first." And I said, "Allow my breath to come first." Okay. He's like, "Just take the breath and let the breath lead the sound." And I thought, okay, got it. And I did it, and he said, "Yeah, more like that. Go in that direction." And I did.
So, Fidelio is coming back to the Met this season in March. For 5 performances, Renee Papa will again return to the role that he originated as Rocco the Humane Jailer. Lisa Davidson will be playing Leonora. And don't miss it. Very simply, don't miss it. Are you in it?
I'm not.
Even though he's not in it, don't miss it. But I want to mention something else about Levine because I want to share his thought process. Because when I worked at the Met and after, I had the lovely privilege of every month I got 1 hour with James Levine to ask him questions and to learn from him, because he felt that I would one day be passing along to people like you, and you at home. And what was very particular about this opera is that Beethoven had trouble writing it, believe it or not. He did edits, he revised it. He wrote 4 overtures before he was finally happy with the 4th one. But the 3rd one is so great that a lot of times you hear it in concert. It's called Leonore Overture Number 3. Mahler and later Leonard Bernstein, when they did Fidelio, would insert Leonore Number 3 between the 2 scenes in the 2nd act. And frankly, I love it because it's more great music, but also it's a transition from the darkness of the prison to the light of the public square, to illumination, to victory, to all of that. And to me, that was a wonderful musical arc, even if Beethoven did not intend that to be there. And frankly, when this production was done, I was very disappointed that Levine didn't play the Leonore Overture Number 3. And I asked him, and he said, "I believe in doing music that is the last statement of the composer." So, for example, in Simone Boccanegra by Verdi or Macbeth by Verdi, he would always do the 2nd version, whereas Riccardo Muti might, for interest, do the 1st version. But Levine always did the last statement, Don Carlo being more problematic, but he would always do what he believed to be the last statement. And he said to me, "I love Leonore Number 3, but Beethoven did not put it in his opera. And we have to present it as he did." And who am I to disagree? I do disagree, but I understand his point, and I take very strongly his belief in respecting the composer, and I think that's the lesson of this. We're not, as I said, we're not going to do every opera you did because we'd be here for 42 hours. But your first conductor at the Met was Vladimir Yurovsky. The second was Valery Gergiev. The third, John Nelson. Fourth, James Levine. The fifth, Julius Rudel.
So there's a story there.
We're only going to do the first 5 because Julius Rudel, who helped found New York City Opera, who was the most, and I mean this in the best sense, expeditious conductor and music master and so on. He was always very practical, and he did what worked to make an opera go on.
Yes.
And he was very responsive if a chicken flew off the stage into his arms, as happened in a production. He held the hen in his left hand and conducted with his right. And then when he could, he handed off the hen, and he kept conducting with both hands. That's not a joke. What did you learn from Julius Rudel?
Oh, my goodness. So much. So much. It was Manon. I was the chef. I got sick, actually, but just before the dress rehearsal. But prior to that, it was very much about precision. with Maestro Rudel. And there was always a level of freedom that he would allow, but he was very clear of where the boundaries were with the singers. I did get sick for the dress. I went to him beforehand. I said, Maestro, I'm so sorry. He said, okay, it's fine. Do what you can. And I did what I could. And afterwards he said, was that all you could do? And I said, I said, well, today, yes. He said, well, it better be better. I was like, okay, fine. Yes, it will be, I promise. And I got better, and it was feeling well. But Rudel, I mean, that was the only time I got to work with him. Levine I worked with quite a few times. John Nelson, actually, quite a few times as well, in both in New York and in Santa Fe as well, and Semele. And yeah, Rudel was a taskmaster in a wonderful sense, and he really kept everything so very taut and very clear. And as a singer, that was incredible to learn, especially at a young age, that you could see everything you needed to see in his beat. You could see every cue, you could see every moment. He was with you in every single second of the performance.
So the music I'm going to play now, because I want you to hear Patrick sing as well, is not what I think any of you would expect would be the first thing I would pick, but I want to keep you guessing. Number 8, Julian.
Oh.
And for many, many reasons, but it's just a wonderful piece of music. It's a wonderful role for you, and we'll talk about it after.
Ça, vous commettez tous un acte épouvantable. Belle dame, Seigneur, en outrageant ici le héros admirable et hardi que voici. Riez, allez, riez du pauvre idéologue qui passe dans son rêve et vous parle des glogues d'amour et de bonté comme autrefois Jésus. Moquez-vous sans pitié de ces bas décousus, de son pourpoint usé, de ces choses boueuses. Vous, bas fripons, courtisans, de ce qui devriez tomber aux pieds de l'être saint. Vous riez. S'il tout lâcheté, et non, malheur, le pas de la montée, viens mon grand,
So, Sancho Panza.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How far back do you go with that guy?
Oh, age 14. Age 14. When I was, well, let's see. My voice broke when I was 11, I began singing not long thereafter. I'd always been in chorus. I began singing as a soloist at church, 12, 13, and then decided summer of my 13th year that I was going to audition for Man of La Mancha at a local community theater in Middletown, New York. I'm from Newburgh originally.
Or as we call it, Borgo Nuovo.
Do we now? May I borrow that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So the advertisement in the newspaper said only those over 30 need apply. I was a punk. I had a peach fuzz mustache, and I thought, why not? I went in, I sang, they invited me to be part of the production. I was just one of the muleteers, but that was my first encounter with Don Quixote. And then in terms of Massenet's Don Quixote, first came to know it when I was at Yale during my graduate work. It is a role both in the musical theater iteration and in Massenet's that I am dying to do. I haven't gone to do it yet. Maybe someday. It's definitely high on the wish list. But it is a role that I just adore. He, amidst all of the madness of Quixote, Sancho brings such humanity into this story. And it's a mixture of compassion and pain and also the ability to find light in the darkness. And there's a lot of darkness for Quixote and for Sancho to some extent as well. But there's he just continues to believe in the good of those around, regardless of being pushed to and fro by Dulcinea or Aldonza, depending on the version. It's very special to me. It's very dear to me. This recording, just as a note, was made as we were coming out of COVID. And it was one of those times when we were all, I think the word is desperate to make music. Or at least that's one of the words. And I was in San Diego for a production of Barber of Seville, a 92-minute Barber of Seville.
Quick shave.
Ooh, really, really, really quick shave. That was done outdoors in the parking lot of an arena. And included the lovely marine layer of San Diego Bay coming in to visit us on most evenings of the performance, and cars flashing their headlights and honking their horns as applause for the performance. And it was around that we did this recording. And it was one of the pieces that I really, really needed to sing at that point.
Since you mentioned San Diego Opera, Ferruccio Furlaretto, the great bass, who's a dear friend of mine, always sang in San Diego. He could sing in any theater in the world, but he always sang in San Diego because he's a golfer. And the golf was the best anywhere. And there's also San Diego State University has a wonderful, Stefan, I don't know if you know this, community of Italian scientists, very specifically scientists. And they took Ferruccio in as sort of a colleague. So they always made him very welcome there. Ferruccio's favorite role is Don Quixote. And he's always wanted to do it at the Met. I pray the Met will do it with him. They should. The closest I ever got to seeing him do it, he did it in Toronto. So I took my mother, we went to Toronto, and it was a very young Quinn Kelsey as Sancho Panza, and a very young Anita Rockville-Ishvili as Aldonza Dulcinea. It's a fabulous opera.
It is a fantastic opera.
It's just a magnificent
opera. It really
opera.
is. And Ferruccio is one of my idols.
Yeah.
See, being on stage with him in Don Giovanni.
Well, that's where I'm going.
Okay, great. Here we go.
So,
mind reading. That's a good thing.
Just a couple of years after, you did more Cipranos and more Cipranos I'm seeing, and the Major Domo Andrea Chenier, back to the Second Jailer, First Officer in The Wonderful View from the Bridge by William Bolcom. I was a bit involved in that production. And then in January of 2003, you were in a really fabulously cast Don Giovanni.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you played Mazzetto,
Yes.
as would a young bass or bass baritone at that point. Ferruccio was Leporello.
Yes.
And I mention this because, to me, if you are staging Don Giovanni, which to me is the hardest opera of all to stage, and you understand Don Quixote and the relationship between Don Quixote and Leporello, I'm sorry, between Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, then you understand Don Giovanni and Leporello, and you can stage it better.
Mm-hmm.
Am I on the right track?
I could not agree more. I think the parallels between those two sets of characters is exactly that. I think that Leporello is always thinking that Giovanni will find some way to not be the despicable, horrible, awful human that he is, and Leporello deep down inside wishes that for him, and he will literally bend over backwards, or in the case of Ferruccio in that Zeffirelli production, will use a cape in a way I have never been able to recreate. I've done Leporello many times.
Describe that. What do you think?
He in the trio, in the second act, when they are. Am I doing it? Second or first act? Pardon me. In the trio, when they're first seducing Elvira. Seducing Elvira. When they're tricking Elvira. He was able to just wrap the cape around himself and around the sword in such a way that he still was completely open to the theater. His voice could carry out, no problem at all. That Zeffirelli set was very generous. Mm-hmm. It was a nice, big, long rake up to the back of the stage. And at the same time, he's disguised under the hat, but the audience can still experience almost all of his expressions. And she cannot in any way determine who he is. It's brilliant.
And the Elvira was Melanie Diener.
Yes.
And they had a young girl in the cast playing Zerlina named Anna Netrebko.
Mm-hmm.
To talk about the level of casting that you... So actually, let's talk about that.
Sure.
You were her boyfriend.
Yes.
Talk about being Anna Netrebko's boyfriend in the operatic sense.
Oh, we had such a great time. It was the first time of many that she and I worked together. I had heard her, few recordings, and she's a spectacular colleague. Always very generous, always very warm, always very fun and playful. There was never enough. It was always, okay, come on, let's do more. Oh, what if we try this? Okay, let's try this other thing. It was a constant sense of play throughout the entire run of those performances. So we had a structure in which we worked, for sure, and there were, good guardrails, as it were, but Anya was very willing to just really dive off the deep end, and I was happy to go with her.
And to further fill out this cast, the Don Giovanni was Peter Mattei, who is still a great Don Giovanni 30 years later.
Absolutely.
And the Donna Anna was a young soprano named Sandra Radvanovsky. So if you could, I'm getting chills when I think about that. And the commendatore was Kurt Moll, which is like having, okay, Yankee fans, Juan Soto batting the commendatore.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to know you as a young artist, because you and Anna Netrebko were the two young ones in the cast.
Yes.
Being with Peter Mattei, Sandra was also quite young, but a little older, and you've been now in Tosca with her numerous times. But Raul Hernandez made his debut as Don Ottavio. What did you learn in this, by the way, excellent Zeffirelli production? It was my favorite Zeffirelli at the Met, was this Don Giovanni.
Yeah, mine too. I loved that production. I dare say I missed that production.
Yeah, I do too.
I learned a ton. Peter Mattei was just such a remarkable colleague and such a remarkable singer, and it was so easy. Everything he did was so easy. It was mind-blowing. Anya, it was a level of freedom in the chemistry between us on stage that I had never experienced with a colleague. And it makes playing the range of Mazzetto, because, Mazzetto, he can be kind of whiny and he can be kind of always complaining. There's so much more that as with any character that he can inhabit in these parts. And when you have a partner in Zerlina that allows you that, it's really phenomenal. And then Ferruccio. I mean, Ferruccio, I just sit there and watched and learned and studied. I had studied Leporello when I was 19 years old. At Catholic University was the first time that I performed Leporello with orchestra. And so I already knew the role. I knew that it was a role that stays with me to this day and that I love in a way I can barely describe. But watching Ferruccio do it and going, okay, I still have a lot to learn. I still have a lot of work to do, because Forlinetto is the gold standard at very least.
In that. In many things.
Yes.
And then you continued in the Mandarin, which is not an orange, in Turandot, the Trojan Soldier, and the wonderful late Troyan new production with Deborah Voigt and the wonderful Lorraine Hunt Lieberson and Ben Hepner.
Yes.
Magnificent cast, James Levine conducting. But then 2003, so really the same year. I didn't quite notice that. The same year as you were in Don Giovanni, you were in Le Nozze di Figaro in a Jonathan Miller production. Again, an excellent, very balanced cast, James Levine conducting. And you played Antonio, the gardener, the drunken gardener. And I must say, I began to always look for you, to appreciate you before. This was sort of the breakthrough role for me, where I thought, I will go to an opera if Patrick Carfizzi is in the cast. But I meant that.
Thank you.
Because it brought more to my experience, because I wanted to watch your growth. Because you were still very new at the Met.
I was.
Because we're talking 2003, that's how many years ago? 21 years ago?
21 years ago, yep.
So this is still the very beginning of your career. I noticed the voice, I noticed the musicality, I noticed the artistry. But Antonio could be the most overacted, scene-chewing, obnoxious, annoying character. But this was the first time I actually felt something for Antonio and his dilemma. Talk about Antonio and his dilemma.
Antonio, he gets in his own way all the time. He really does. His dilemma is, basically he's seen what's going on, but he's never really sober enough to say it. But playing drunk is not a matter of stumbling around as if you don't know which end is up. Playing drunk is actually a matter of going from the opposite direction, going from, I know exactly where I am, I know exactly what I'm doing, but the words are just not coming out right. Both in the Giovanni and the Anton and the Nozze, both pieces that I have a long history with. Nozze was actually the first piece that I saw on PBS as a kid, and I watched that videotape to the point that the VCR spit the tape out. And my parents looked at me and went, I guess you really like this opera thing. I said, yeah. Fabulous cast, Kathleen Battle. And recitative became something that I started to fall in love with even more. And I think for Antonio, even though Act 2 Finale is the big scene, the recitative with the Count, Io vi dico signor che crobino, that recitative is one of those turning points in the night, in the plot of the night. Not as much true with Mazzetto, but definitely true multiple times over with Leporello. And learning in these two processes in that fourth season, that recitative has so much more to it and requires so much more work than just simply learning the notes and learning the words. And being able to work and listen to how Peter Mattei shapes the recit, listen to how I'm trying to remember who the Count was in that first.
John Brilliant.
Oh, John.
I'm sorry.
No.
Dwayne Croft.
Dwayne Croft.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Listen to how Dwayne shaped a recit. It was very, very informative.
So, in addition to attending that performance to see you, there was a woman who made her debut that night as the Countess Almaviva that I absolutely fell madly in love with in every way, as I had not done for many years.
Arteros.
Right. In the 70s, I fell in love with another woman singing the same role, the Countess, who went on to give me great pleasure as a friendship, but also as a great star. But then there was this woman I didn't know, Anya Harteros, however it's pronounced, who made her debut. I'd never heard of her. And she was just so remarkably wonderful musically, dramatically, that I had to know who she was. And I'm jealous of you that you got to be on stage with Anya Harteros.
I mean...
Talk about... I mean, if you don't know her, because she almost never sings here.
Yeah, she mostly stays in Europe now,
Right,
because
Munich
of family.
mostly, and just a couple of other places. I've seen her in Vienna, Salzburg, Munich, Milan, and I think that's it. And there's just, to me, no other singer in the world like her, even now.
It's an incredibly special voice, and I mean, also a warm, generous, phenomenal colleague, but an incredibly special voice that has so much ease and is so exquisitely, perfectly produced. There's a poise about Harteros' work that I just marveled at every single time I would sit out in the house and watch her. One of the great joys of doing some of these supporting characters is that time that you get to wander out into the theater and watch some of these truly phenomenal artists create. And Harteros definitely was one of the ones that I was eager to sit out and watch any chance I could.
And she's done a remarkable range of music. She was the best Violette I've seen at the Met in La Traviata. She was the best Countess, apart from Kiri Takano, who I saw decades before. But I've seen a lot of great Countesses, but there was just something extra about her performance.
It's just so easy.
Yeah.
What she brings to the Countess is so easy and so vulnerable and so tragically sad, but it's never pushed into your face. It's just she brings you into the moment so beautifully and delicately. It breaks your heart. The only one I would add also is Soleil Zukoski.
Always.
I really
Finished soprano,
the finished soprano. Always adored her interpretation of Countess.
And Harteros also was a fantastic Donna Anna at the Met. And that's an incredibly hard role. So we want her back, but she doesn't leave Europe. She just doesn't.
No.
And so if you got to see her live, you're very lucky. If you can get to Europe to see her, you're very lucky. But there's a lot of her on video. She was one of Jonas Kaufmann's favorite colleagues, and they did everything together for a long time. So I want to mention Anya Harteros because I don't think she'll ever be sitting here. I wish, but I don't think she'll be sitting here.
I wish too.
Now, I want yet another one of my favorite roles of yours is in one of my favorite operas. Again, I said Semiramide is often my favorite opera. Another one of my favorite operas is Rossini's Italiana and Algeri. Because to me, yes, I adore Verdi, you know that, and his operas about promoting Italian unification and Italian identity are great. But Italiana and Algeri does the same thing, but with humor. And is such a wonderful opera. It was written in 1813, the year that Verdi and Wagner were born, which meant that Rossini was way ahead of the curve. And you played Halle, and Julian, would you please set up number 4, and let's listen, and then we'll get to a discussion.
Solitare nel petto, agitare a fanfare mi sento, un ignoto soave e contento, mi trasporta a brillare mi fa. Un ignoto soave e contento, mi trasporta e brillare mi fa. Un ignoto soave e contento, mi trasporta e brillare mi fa. Voi partite, né più m'annoiate, tu va seco, e svolgie, obbedite, va seco, obbedite, voi la bella al mio seno guidate, va questa e allora la beltà, voi la bella al mio seno guidate, va questa e allora la beltà, sì la beltà, sì la beltà, va questa e allora la beltà. Al mio fuoco, al trasporto, al desidio, non resiste l'acceso cor mio, questo caro trionfo novello, mi trasporta a brillare mi fa. Al mio fuoco, al trasporto, al desidio, non resiste l'acceso cor mio, questo caro trionfo novello, quando dolce a questa sarà. Voi partite, m'annoiate, v'annoiate, obbedite, tu la seguo, non vos guardie, obbedite, obbedite. Al mio fuoco, al trasporto, al desidio, non resiste acceso col mio, questo caro trionfo novello, quando dolce a questa mazzara, quando dolce a questa sarà, quest'alma sarà, quando dolce a questa sarà, quest'alma sarà, quando dolce a quest'alma sarà, quando dolce a quest'alma sarà, sì, sì, sarà, sì, sì, sarà.
So I want to ask you many things, but the first thing is, we were talking about Handel before, and you mentioned how Handel and Rossini couldn't be more different. And a lot of singers I know say, well, if you could sing one, you could sing the other.
True.
And I typically don't answer them because I want them to tell us why. But they are very different. The markings are different. The use of language is different. I think the breathing is quite different.
Yes.
And therefore, I don't agree that if you could do one, you could do the other. Good artists can, but it's also the expression is the way the voice moves. That sometimes the voice does not move the same way for each. And to me, Rossini is a lot harder. It's
I agree.
a lot more exciting,
I
a lot
agree.
more wonderful. I love Rossini's music, every note.
Me too.
But talk about this, because we've had you sing in Italian, apart from Don Quixote that we spoke about, in Handel, who was a German, in Mozart, who was an Austrian. We're finally getting an Italian who is having you sing in his native tongue. Talk about singing Rossini.
Oh my gosh, where to begin? Talk about singing Rossini. Rossini, all right. Singing Rossini, singing Mustafa in this particular case had been a role that I had wanted to sing for ages and ages and ages. My first encounter with Rossini was Magnifico in Cenerentola. And I've had lots and lots of great opportunities to explore that character in a variety of different productions. But what was so enticing, I should say, about Mustafa was the movement in the voice and the ability to move the voice. And it's interesting. There's a conversation to be had about if the voice can still move, there's a healthiness that's being maintained in the instrument over the course of time. And so insofar as the transparency of the voice is maintained beautifully through Handel and Mozart, the flexibility of the voice is maintained beautifully in Handel, but more so still in Rossini, because you cannot add weight If you add weight, you cannot move the voice. You can have lots of color, lots of dimension, lots of expression that goes on in Rossini, and Rossini calls for it, begs for it, and we have to bring it to the music when we were singing in Rossini, singing Rossini. But it's not a matter simply of singing all the notes. It's a matter of singing all the shapes and all of the internal shapes. And that, for me, is where we can then birth the dramatic gesture in Rossini. We birth it from the different internal musical shapes in the lines. Mustafa is a great example of this, I think, because the aria you just heard, I actually don't know from which recording this was.
Of yours?
Of mine, yeah. But
I got it off your website.
There we go. Surprise. I know which one. Thank you. This aria, for him to do all the twists and turns that he has to do musically and vocally, and what he has to do in order to accomplish the staging, which, depending on the production, it can be that you're trying to dive off a diving board, or you're doing push-ups, or what have you. Or you're in a bathtub. Just depends. I mean, and actually that Met production, the Ponel, was also with Ferruccio as Mustafa. But so singing,
Trying to learn how to eat spaghetti.
yes,
Watch Ferruccio for Linetto. Try to learn how to eat spaghetti. It was brilliant.
brilliant. But Rossini really is about understanding that the gesture is there for you in the musical shape, and that you can reach into the musical shape to find it and take it. And it is much, much harder. The breathing is definitely a much, much harder and more a matter of precise calculation of exactly where and how the breath needs to go, exactly how the note needs to shorten at the end of a phrase in order to have time for the breath, which Rossini doesn't necessarily give us in the moment. He doesn't necessarily, on the page. We don't necessarily look it on the page and go, oh, I can just, chop a little bit off that eighth note. Now you've got to know the shape of the language and how it fits with the music, and then build from there. The characters, I think, are a great conversation to have as well.
Yeah.
These Buffo characters.
I want to get to Buffo in a bit.
Okay, we'll get to it later.
But
and that's good.
I went because I love that opera. I love that production. I had learned it, quote, on Marilyn Horne's interpretation of the role. And they announced Isabella, the title character, as being played by Olga Borodina. And if you remember her, or Borodina, fabulous voice, not a barrel of laughs. Not someone we think of. She has this sort of serious Russian expression and carries all of that around her like black clouds above her. Magnificent singer, don't get me wrong.
Yes.
Fantastic, amazing singer who does high drama. If you saw Mussorgsky's Kovanshina with her as Marfa, you never forget that. Fabulous singer, so do not get me wrong. But to see her announced to play one of the funniest characters in opera, I had to be there. and my friend Ferruccio and you and all kinds of people, but I had to be there. And it was a brilliant lesson for me, although I understood the concept, but watching her do it. When you play comedy, it's not funny to you. The situation is always serious. If you have to get from here to there and not be caught by someone, if you have to teach someone to twirl pasta and grate parmigiano at the same time, arrange an escape for everyone because you're distracting this man with his papatachi Mustafa and all that. She twirled that pasta and she grated that parmigiano with such expertise. And her face never smiled for the entire opera. But her seriousness of purpose meant that when the big payoff comes at the end and she sings Pensa la Patria, sing of your homeland, sing of Italy, the crowd went wild. They really went wild because that's when she finally unleashed everything that she could do vocally. And I will always remember that performance of hers. Also because, I want to know if you remember this, something happened in the second act. So I went back in the archives when I prepared for tonight. In the stage manager's report, in Act Two, a paper color frame smoldered, dropped on the rear projection ceiling center, caught fire, burned several holes in the rear projection with a considerable amount of smoke. The curtain was closed, announcements made, ceiling checked from above and below, debris removed, performance continued, 8-minute delay, audience applauded, return to the scene. How did Miss Borodina respond to that?
Well, I don't remember how Miss Borodina responded to that because she was on the other side of the stage, but I remember how I responded to that very well because I will never forget that night. All of a sudden, I look at Ferruccio, and Ferruccio says, "Patrick, we have to go." I said, "What?" And he just looked up, and I went, "Oh!" And as the words were coming out of my mouth, the fire curtain was coming in, and Ferruccio was dragging me off stage left. Yeah, it was an adventure. I don't know what Borodina said. My guess is that Borodina probably went, "Okay."
It's true. It's really, I mean, I worked with her a lot. I never saw her smile.
Yeah.
But magnificent artist. So who am I to complain? You continued at the Met, and not only at the Met. I want to point out that although we associate Patrick Carfizzi primarily at the Met with his nearly 500 performances, you do sing elsewhere.
Yes.
And thank goodness for that, in Santa Fe and San Diego and Dallas and a lot of places. So when you're not here with us, you are somewhere else singing and have a very full singing life. But I mostly have seen you here at the Met. You continued to do lots of comprimari roles, small roles, deepening always the roles that I saw him do before. So when you did Mazzetto again in the Martha Keller production with Thomas Hampson as Don Giovanni, Renee Papa as Leporello,
Yes.
Anya Harteros as Donna Anna, Christine Gerke, before she went Wagnerian, was Donna Elvira. And therefore, an amazing cast. Martha Keller, who is, I have to say, is a friend, and therefore I was involved in that production from the beginning, was handed to do that production when the previous person was unable to do it. So the sets were built, the costumes were done, the lighting was practically designed, and therefore, all she could do was direct in existing scenery and costumes.
Yes.
And the scenery was, unlike the Zeffirelli, which was very compact, very broad, and a lot of times Leporello was here and Giovanni was there, and there was this big gap in the middle, and she had to direct within that, and I thought she did very well at it. But what did you learn as Mazzetto in that new cast? One thing I remember is that she directed, before we had the term intimacy direction or coaching, whatever, she directed your interaction after you've been beaten up by Giovanni, your subsequent interaction with Zerilli in a very sexy, sexual way that was very believable and made your character a lot more human and humane. Talk about that or anything you want.
Yeah.
No, because it's such a good production.
It is. It is.
Not the scenery, but
I was going to say
directing,
the set was tricky and really hard to work on, and we, as one tends to do, you tend to make a bit of fun of the chandeliers that looked like someone went and bought a whole bunch of plastic spoons and kind of threw them up in the air, and some glue got them together, and it was a bizarre physical production.
Yeah.
But what we did, working around that, and what we particularly did, if I remember right, the Zerlinos were Nicole Heaston and Camilla Tilling, I think. Am I wrong about that?
I can look it up.
It might be Keikung. But what I do remember very well is that Mata allowed so much room for the intimacy to just naturally kind of brew between the two of us. There wasn't a lot of, okay, now do this and put your hand here and now roll over that way, and which can often be the case with Mazzetto. And look, that can work as well. Where you want someone that comes in and wants to heavily choreograph these scenes, because they can get out of hand sometimes if you don't. We had much more latitude in that production to be able to really get into each other's intimate space in a professional manner, of course, but really feel like a couple. and we had a lot of time too. That was another virtue of that production. We had a full rehearsal process. We did not. It was not. We were not running out of the room after 3 hours, going, "Oh, okay, that's great. We've got that figured out. Let's go." No, I learned quite a bit from her in terms of subtlety and quieting the body.
Well, I'm making the assumption you all know who Martha Keller is. Martha is a great actress, and she is Swiss. She lives in Switzerland and Paris. She is completely fluent in German, in French, in English, as was a Tony Award nominee for Judgment at Nuremberg here on Broadway. She acts on the French stage and the German language theater, in a lot of films in all the languages, and loves opera. She famously did the Arthur Honegger, Joan of Arc at the Stake, the narration part. She's directed a lot of opera, wonderful Carmelites, dialogues of the Carmelites. And frankly, as I said, in this case, she was just sort of handed the production when the previous person stepped away. And it was rather remarkable that without being able to have any influence on the scenery or costumes, she directed as she did. It was the best directed opera I'd seen at the Met in a very, very, very long time as stage direction. And I've always wondered, yes, there are many women opera directors. Francesca Zambello has been here. There are many, and they're wonderful. But I felt that for that particular opera, as this cosmopolitan European woman who speaks English, who reads music, that was such an inspired, lucky pick on the part of Joe Volpe, who asked her to come in and do that. And had you worked with women directors before that?
For Martha Keller, Francesca,
Zambello and
in the Troya.
Yeah.
I think Francesca was perhaps the first.
Yeah.
And then Marta, yeah.
Now, thankfully, there are many more, but at
Yes.
that time it was unusual
Yes.
still.
Yes.
And Francesca Zambello, who heads Washington National Opera, is a great and well-known opera director, and that's her thing. Martha Keller is known primarily as an actress rather than an opera director, and that's why it was just so wonderful and eye-opening. Anya Harteros was, as I said, the best Donna I'd ever seen, because it was something that Martha Keller heard in the music about the responses that Anna had and directed the response to the music rather than the words. If I can, I don't know what you feel about that. And there was something so particular about the way Anya Harteros musically would come to realizations about who the Don was, who killed her father, all of that stuff. To the very end of the opera, it was just a fabulous night of theater and opera and singing.
Yes.
And I want to talk about another very fabulous night of theater, opera, and singing that you were involved in. One of my favorite operas, and still relatively early in your Met career. This is what I find really remarkable, is that you continue to do great stuff as recently as 2 nights ago.
Thanks.
But this began early. I'm allowed to say it.
Thanks, Fred.
No, but I really mean that. I would
Thank
not.
you.
You know me enough by now to know after 2 hours, I don't say things I don't mean. I only say what I really mean. You played the role of Paolo Albiani in Verdi's Simone Boccanegra, conducted by James Levine, one of his favorite operas, in which Placido Domingo, who had always played the tenor role, Gabriele, took on Simone Boccanegra. And it was, to me, better than his Otello. It was kind of like everything that he understood about aging and passion and ceding power and the limits of power that he communicated in Otello. He did even better, this is my opinion, as Simone Boccanegra, with Adrienne Pachonka as Amelia, Marcello Giordani as a wonderful Gabriele Adorno, James Morris as Jacopo Fiesco, Patrick Carfizzi as Paolo Albiani, and Pietro was Richard Bernstein. So that level of artistry all around you and you contributing to it, there was not a weak link in the cast. And if anything you have to tell me, because I never spoke to anyone except James Levine after the fact, about that night
Oh gosh.
and about everything that happened, because it really, I wrote an article about it years later, not a review, about when I remember my great nights as an opera goer, not as an opera worker. That was right there.
Yeah. That was an incredible cast. That was an incredible production to be part of. Being around all those remarkable artists who are so mind-blowingly gifted, and being considered at their same, or similar, I should say, similar level of preparation and of approach to the work. It's very humbling. It's very, very humbling. Placido is incredibly powerful to be on stage with. There is no other way to say it. There is a deliberateness in his every gesture. I do have to say, the Otello still sticks in my mind as one of the most athletic things that he ever did, and was impressive because of that. But the Bocca Negra carried a gravitas with it that was undeniable. Playing the poison man, as it were, playing the villain, which some may see as a departure from me, I actually really don't see as such. I think that the comic characters are only a breath away from being as nasty and evil and conniving as the characters that we perceive as being overtly evil. Magnifico is a bastard. Sorry, there's no way to say it. Bartolo is a real jerk. But being in the presence of all these great artists, being led by James Levine in this piece that at that point, it was the third time I had done Bocca Negra. I'd done it in San Francisco, had one of those wild operatic moments where I jumped in midway through a performance, did Bocca Negra, half of Bocca Negra on Friday night, sang 2 Traviatas on Saturday, and sang a full Bocca Negra on Sunday. And then went out for dinner, as one must. But that was an incredible experience, and it was electric. Every rehearsal was electric. The level of, I was exhausted at the end of every rehearsal. I remember that was the one time that I asked my voice teacher, Richard Cross, to come into the house. Got permission for him to come into the house to get his feedback. Because when you're in the midst of that level of intensity from your various colleagues, it gets a little difficult to see the proverbial forest from the trees. Yeah. And I needed a bit of reassurance. And I was getting it from coaches. I was getting wonderful support from the music staff, from Jim, from colleagues alike. But it was definitely high stakes. And high stakes that was deeply rewarding and kind of terrifying in a good way. Terrifying in a way that motivates and that makes you dig into the work even more. So those performances really were definitely a highlight.
Julia, would you play number 3 and then after sit at number 9?
Oh.
Portato per la posta da lontane 1000 miglia, mi vedete quanto costa quanto vale la bottiglia? 100 suli? No! 30? No! 20? Nessuno si scomenti per provarvi il mio contento di siamo qua accoglimento, non vi voglio un po' la gente uno scudo regalare. Uno scudo veramente più bravo non si può dare, non si può dare, non si può dare, non si può dare, non si può dare. Ecco qua, così stupendo, si basami quellisire, tutte a passacchio vendo niente, vendi 9 lire. Ma siccome col palese io son nato nel paese, per 3 lire a voi lo cedo, sol 3 lire a voi li chiedo. Così chiaro è come il sole.
Saved by the bell. Or by the bottle of elixir.
By the bottle. Elisier d'Amore, for me, it's not my favorite opera, but it's one of the examples I give when I'm asked to name the perfect opera. It is the perfect opera. And any time I try to introduce someone to opera, I take them either to Rigoletto or Elisier d'Amore. I would take them to Semiramide, but they would think I'm insane. But Rigoletto, yes, certainly is the perfect opera. But Elisier d'Amore, the music is so gorgeous. The Italian is so forward. And I wonder if you were listening, the sound of Patrick's Italian here compared to the Rossini, clear both times, but a different, and you correct me if you think I'm wrong, a different sounding Italian.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah.
So talk more about that.
Sure. I mean, fun context too. This is 2016 in Houston, at Houston Grand Opera. It's a production that I actually just jumped back into last year on literally a night's notice. I got a call Tuesday night, was in San Francisco by Wednesday morning at 3 a.m., and did that production that night on stage after having 7 years away from it. So Elixir is very near and dear to my heart. But yes, the language is absolutely just set differently when we get to Donizetti. Donizetti, and I think we can say this also about Stuarda, not also the Seria in addition to the Buffa. There is a clarity. Donizetti understands space in language, the space that you need to finish a word. Donizetti has always had a great grip on that. And I think that's probably what I attach to most with these roles, with Dulcamara in particular. I mean, the duet with Adina, there are lots of great examples. You have these endless lines of patter in them, but they're all perfectly set. They all absolutely fit. All you have to do is do what's there on the page. You don't have to add anything to it. You just have to do exactly what's there on the page and keep your breath nice and focused and centered.
I never looked at this, and I should have, in the score, in the libretto, where they're singing in sort of a fake Venetian dialect. Is it written as scenator? Or
it is not.
Okay.
It is not. I mean, we all wish it would be, right? But no, it's not.
Okay. Because there's almost a whistling sound that he makes.
Exactly. Fa felice un scenatore.
February 3rd, 2018, I was at the Met, as I seem to always be at the Met, because I love Ellie's here. And Pretty Yende was about to sing her Adina. Wonderful Matthew Polenzani was a wonderful Nemorino. And Dr. Dulcamara was scheduled to be Ildebrando d'Arcangelo, and he was in the first act. But then when the curtain came up in the second act, it was Patrick Carfizzi.
Surprise!
And and it happened again on February 8th.
Yes.
Where were brought in for the second act. I don't want to talk about Ilbrando's whatever medical issue he had or whatever, but what's it like when you, as it's called in opera, have to jump in?
It is equal parts exciting and terrifying, for sure. I've done it several times. I've done it on planes. I've done it when I'm in-house already. In this case, I had warning. I knew that Ildebrando was not feeling well. And look, your heart goes out to a colleague because we've all been there when we've had to sing and not felt not even 100, not even 80%, but 70%. And you feel like the voice is just not working. The body is fighting itself. So that's where we begin. We begin with this compassion for our colleague if we have to go in and substitute for them in the moment. And from there, you've got to prepare. You have to prepare for the first day of rehearsal, whether you're the cover or the principal. You have to prepare as if you are going to be called on at any moment. And that is, that's what you lean into. That's what you rely on. Had a brief meeting with Domingo Hindoyan, the conductor of that evening. And by brief, I mean about 3.5 minutes. And he said, okay, we'll do this here, that there, the other thing here. Great. Does that work for you? Yes. In the duet with Adina, are you comfortable doing it at this tempo? Yes. Great. Okay. And this is how we set up for the finale. Wonderful. And away we went. And they throw you into the costume and you take a deep breath and you go out on stage. And it actually reminds me of my first time being kicked on stage at the Met by dear sweet Charlie Anthony, may he rest. Charlie Anthony, who sang more performances, I believe, than anyone else in the history of the theater. Charlie started out as Caruso was actually his name.
Charles Anthony Caruso.
Charles Anthony Caruso. And it was Bing, I believe, that said to him, there shall only ever be one Caruso at the Met. And so he became Charlie Anthony. And Charlie became a dear friend, a fishing buddy as well. And when I made my debut in 99, I came to the stage after about 4 days of rehearsal in the room, was looking out, was intimidated as could be, and Charlie was there. And he's like, what? What's up, kid? I said, what? It's the Met. He said, if you weren't meant to be here, you wouldn't be here. And Charlie then, I think, coming into his 70s, put his foot on my butt and kicked me out on the stage. And I stumbled out, and I looked up, and I looked back, and there was Charlie in the wings laughing. And
he began in 1954 at the Met. Yeah. And he had an incredibly long career. It was beloved. And at a certain point in his 80s, he decided to retire, and he died almost immediately. And he wasn't sick.
No.
It was just kind of like he got life from being at the Metropolitan Opera, and we loved him.
Yep.
And when you talk about people who were Met characters who were not always known to the general public, there were people like Charles Anthony, certain singers, certain conductors and coaches and so on, who you never saw them in the public. But I'm forgetting one now who was a German coach. I don't know if...
Tausig, Walter
Tausig.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah.
And Walter Tausig was there till he was 93. And James Levine believed in keeping a lot of these wonderful older artists because they knew Richard Strauss, they knew Karl Böhm, they knew all these people and could transmit what they learned from those wonderful titans of the past.
Exactly. I mean, Tausig made sure that all of the Meisters and Meistersinger knew every line. That's why that fugue never fell apart.
Wow.
Is because when you learned it with Tausig, you learned everyone's part.
Speaking of fugue, I meant to mention something. Back to Italiana and Algeri. The end of the first act has a wonderful septet that's really incredibly hard to sing, where everyone is so confused that they lose language and they just make sound, boop, bop, beep, bop, bop, and it's fabulous. I believe that Verdi created with Falstaff the fugue at the end of 007, inspired by Italiana and Algeri. I always say, if you want to understand Wagner and Verdi, just study Italiana and Algeri. And almost everything is in that opera that they took, whether it's serious or comic opera.
I kind of love that.
Anyway.
Especially because Falstaff is one of my favorite pieces of all time.
Yeah, it's a magnificent piece. I do want to mention, just in passing, because I know you're all going to Tosca, so you're going to see Patrick Sacristan, which has grown and evolved, and unlike a lot of sacristans, I knew Italo Taio, who played it for many years, they're wonderful, endearing characters, but sometimes, kind of like Antonio in Le Nozze, the person playing it makes it too big and too implausible. Your Sacristan, which I've seen since 2017, is indelible and always responds to the Mario Cavaradossi you're playing with. And
Thanks.
It's not the same performance every time. And so with Freddie Di Tommaso the other night making his Met debut and finding the volume of the auditorium, when he sang at the beginning, I could hear him, but he didn't put out the volume that he would about 10 minutes later. Probably just had to get a measure of being on the Met stage, sing a major role, 4,000 people, and everything going on that night, Lisa Davidson, the whole thing. And it falls to artists like you to keep them in line.
No.
No, but I mean
Yeah,
that.
no, I know what you mean.
I mean that.
I know what you mean.
That they become the Charles Anthonys, the ballast, the security that allows these people making their first performance in iconic roles. In Freddie Di Tommaso's case, his Met debut, on a night there was a gala celebrating Puccini's. He died November 29th, 1924, so we're about to observe the 100th anniversary of his death. And so therefore there was a lot riding that night. And your interpretation was entirely different from the last time I saw you do it.
Thanks.
And do you plan that? How does that happen that way?
It's organic.
It's
got
organic.
to be, because and I mean, this is, you know, this always goes to the question that people say, well, you do the role so many times, don't you get bored, and doesn't it get kind of something that you just go and do your version? No, I don't want to just go and do my version. I want to go do the version that evolves with my colleagues in the room, on the stage. With Freddie, it's one way. With Alanya, it's another way. With Kaleha, it's still yet another way. With Brian Jade, it's different.
Yeah.
You're getting different input all the time. You're getting different input and different ideas, and you're getting different ways to think about the way you say the character, the text, and the way you play the character. So yeah, it's hopefully always going to be different, still within all the constructs that we have from, you know, and framing that we have from Puccini, and all of the musical specificity that we must adhere to. But no, it has to keep evolving.
So I realized that Brian Jade, Joseph Calleja, and Roberto Alagna have all been in that chair. And Alagna was the last person here, January 27, 2020, before the pandemic. And I'm not saying who my favorite friend is, because I'm friends with two of the three of them. I don't know Alagna well enough to call him a friend. There's just something about his Mario that I completely believe every moment of. And he does something that Freddie Di Tommaso did a little bit the other night. In the third act, sometimes Mario seems to genuinely believe that the firing squad will shoot blanks and that they'll get away. But Alagna foreshadows the sense that he knows he's going to die, despite what Tosca will bring. And Freddie Di Tommaso brought that. I think he'll bring more of it next time, but he brought some of that already.
I think so too. Yeah, and I think as he gets more comfortable with the physical space of the Met, he will embrace that even more. For me, Alagna really played in a way that I have rarely experienced on that stage, and it was from the moment he walks in behind me for Che fai recito l'Angelus. The moment he came in, I thought, oh, game on, we are going to have extra fun tonight.
Yeah.
And he would be down in the space by the table more often, and just the two of us kind of problem solving together, I think, is a good way to term it. But really living the two characters as well as we could in the moment. It's it's so much fun.
So Tosca is set in time of war, and in the second act we get news of a battle, of a defeat. And you earlier this year were in a production of La Forza del Destino, Verdi's La Forza del Destino, directed by Mario Strelinsky, conducted by Yannick Nézet-Séguin. Lisa Davidson was Leonora, Brian J. Don Alvaro. Brian was here during that. An excellent cast all around. Controversial as a production. Not everybody agreed with all of its ideas, but it was a serious endeavor that provoked ideas and provoked discussion. It was not stupidity. It was controversial, which is fine with opera. And you played the character of Fra Melitone. And Fra Melitone, and this is, you asked me to talk about Buffo, here we come with Buffo.
Okay.
Typically is played as comic relief. About all the seriousness going on, everybody is having a bad life in La Forza del Destino.
Particularly in Forza.
And particularly in La Forza del Destino. It's just bad for everyone. And, but somehow Melitone comes in and he fritters about, and he doles out soup and so on. Not in this production. And the fact that I imagine it was part Trelinsky and part you, and maybe Maestro Nizes again as well, the interpretation was so shockingly fresh and different that it cast a whole other aura around everything going on around you. And it's a good part. It's not the biggest part of the opera, but it was usually the moment where we would sit back and just say, 5 minutes of comedy. No.
Nope.
You ratcheted up the drama. Talk about how you evolved that, how you perhaps got away from the traditional interpretation and where you went with it, because it really knocked the whole spirit of the production up much higher and made the subsequent tragedy a lot more palpable from the most unexpected source.
Wow. It was a conscious choice, and it was a real wonderful and challenging level of work between Mariusz and I over the course of the entire rehearsal process to strip away the idea of buffo from Melitone in any way, shape, or form. Melitone was the worst of us. Melitone was full of darkness, behaved in ways that you would never expect. Awful. Really an awful, ungenerous, unkind, all these things, and yet still a man of the cloth. And from there, we were able to find a lot of depth in not just the anger of this character and the anger of the moment, but also his overall, he despised these people that he had to help. He despised the idea of charity, the thought that he would have to give of his time and himself to go out there and help these folks that he considered completely and totally ungrateful. And it's interesting coming from a buffo standpoint, because as we said a few moments ago, these buffo characters are as much darkness as they are light. And if they are to be believed, the humor that we laugh at them, near them, with them, by them, that comes from situation, not from shtick. And one of the first focuses of the rehearsal when Mariusz and I met in the room was he said, okay, look, I know that you do a lot of buffo work. We're going to strip out all of the shtick. We're going to strip out all of the soup aria was cut. But we're gonna do the carita, the aria, but we're gonna strip out all of the shtick and we're just gonna keep refining it and distilling it to the point where we get to the essence of what this man really is, not what this man portrays himself to be, as a kind of run-of-the-mill man of the cloth who's just in a bad mood. No. Melitone is not just in a bad mood. Melitone really despises everything around him. So it was a great process. And when we hit the stage after that 6 weeks of tearing this character apart, of literally breaking down every conception I'd had, because I'd done Forza a few times previously, but breaking all of that out, getting rid of all of that, and just bringing the character down to its darker essence. And it was wonderful because on the stage we had such a deep well from which to draw in the moment in terms of organic response to Guardiano, to the chorus, to Leonora. It made him into a very dark person, but a very real person. And as someone who spends a lot of time with the buffo characters, I do believe very, very deeply that these characters must be as real as we can make them. Caricature does not last. Caricature does not last with an audience. An audience is not interested in caricature going, okay, fine. Maybe for 3 to 5 minutes they buy it. But beyond that, it becomes uninteresting. And definitely as an actor and as a singer, it becomes incredibly uninteresting. And it doesn't leave you anywhere to go in the storytelling. So that Forza God, it was an incredible experience. I learned so much. I worked so hard. It usually took me about a half an hour after every performance to actually regain myself a little bit, because it got so dark.
Yeah.
And he was so full of hate and was such a fearmonger, and he just, God, he was really ugly. He was a really ugly individual.
Yeah. And you made him very ugly.
Thanks. Yay. Mission accomplished.
I want to conclude what's been a wonderful evening by playing something that's not typically part of a program I do about Italian opera, because it's not opera, it's not in Italian, but it's just such gorgeous singing. And today being November 14th, 3 days ago was the November 11th, in other words, the end of World War I. And all war is bad. We want to end them all right now, whatever's happening in the world. Ceasefire, stopping wars right now. But World War I produced a lot of poetry and a lot of beautiful writing that was set to song by many composers, including Charles Ives. And it's a simple poem. Simple is really the wrong word, but you know what I mean, called In Flanders Field. And we'll listen to Patrick Carfizzi sing it. Please thank Patrick Carfizzi.
Thank you so much.
And I wish all of you here and listening elsewhere peaceful holidays, love for one another, and put March 5th in your calendar for Renee Papa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred.